Today we're going to work on creating our closed slot weave. You can see here on my loom I have already created a tabby weave. I have chosen two coordinating colors and I'm now going to create a closed slot weave underneath the tabby weave. So I will get a little bit of yarn in my first color, have that ready. I'm going to get a section of yarn for my second part of the closed slot weave and set it aside. Now I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle. And I am going to go ahead and start on this side of my loom. And you can see where I finished off last time with my tabby weave, I am coming out on top of the final warp stream. So you can see the weft is finishing on top. So I am then going to start with my new color, which is this light pink. I'm going to make sure that I go under the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and start weaving, and I'm going to stop about halfway. So I'll still leave a nice long tail, and I want to beat this up nice and tight with my tabby. But you can see that I finished halfway here, and now I want to turn back and go back the other direction. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I want to include this warp string, so I need to make sure that I go over the top of it like I am here, and I loop through the bottom. And now I'm going back the other direction. Okay. So I'm going to pull this. Now I want to make sure that I want to leave it a little bit loose. I do not want to pull it tight before I beat this down. So now I can give it a tug, and you can see where I've left this weft string is about halfway to the next warp string. So that's where I want to leave it. So beat this up again, and then we're going to go ahead and keep going. Oh, look, I messed up my... Do you see how I messed this up right here? I went over and I was supposed to go under. So I'm going to pull this out. I didn't catch that until just now. Let's fix it. I need to go over this warp string and under this one. So let's fix that. If I didn't catch that now, that would have been a problem for the next row. All right, now let's come back. So I'm coming out on top of this warp string. Now we'll go under. And again, I'm only going halfway. I don't want to pull this too tight, but let's beat this. Okay, so now I've come out on top, and I need to loop over this and go back the other direction. Beat them together, give it a little tug. Okay, and then I'm going to keep going back and forth till I get however much woven for the amount of yarn I have, or however much light pink area I want to have in my weaving. All right, so that pretty much is how far I'm going to go. I am going to go ahead and trim off my tail here. Just let that become the selvage out there. All right, now in order to create the slot, okay, the slot in the center, I'm going to go ahead and start weaving on this side now. So I'm going to thread my needle with my second yarn color. And you can see that since I started underneath, I've got my warp string on top of my weft string, I need to go over. I need to do the opposite with my pink that I did with my purple. Okay, so I'm going to start weaving until I get over here. Go to the center, leave the tail. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. And now I'm going to zoom in pretty close here so you can see what I'm doing. So here's where I did my tabby weave on this side at the beginning of my closed slot weave. If I pull this down and separate out my first row from my second row, you'll see that I can see the warp string. So I went under this warp string, which means now I'm going to loop over this warp string and grab it and go back the other direction. And what you'll see start happening is where this area is right here, you're going to beat these back together and you're actually joining one side to the other. You would have a slot here. If you didn't loop through this one shared warp string, if you stopped here and you stopped here, you'd have a slot, like a buttonhole. And we don't want a buttonhole. That would be an open slot weave. This is a closed slot weave. So the slot that we're making here actually doesn't become a slot when we loop over the warp string. Okay, so let's go back and do the next row. So I finished underneath the warp string. I'm going to go on top of the warp string this time till I get over here, and I'm going to pull these apart. I've gone underneath this one, which means I need to go over. So I need to loop, grab it, and then go back the other direction. And I'm going to keep going. Do you see how this is starting to come in? That's a problem, and if I wouldn't have caught that now, I'd be in trouble. So it's because I'm pulling my weft string too tight. So before I go any farther, I'm going to give it some slack and try and loosen that back up. Otherwise, I'm going to have a really bad weaving by the time I get done. We don't want these to get pulled in like that. If they start going in at all, that is a problem. So catch it early, because if you keep weaving and they come in farther and farther, that is a sign of bad weaving, and you likely have to pull it out. And sometimes it gets so bad where you just have to start over. We don't want that to happen. Okay, so that is fixed now. I can keep going. See, that was much too tight. I think I tugged it by mistake a little too tight. Now you see how my yarn is too thick, or it's doubled up because I'm getting to the end of it. I need to make sure that it stays single, so I pull out the one that's not supposed to be in there. All right, so over here I'm going to trim this. And so this is what that finished closed slot weave looks like. If you've done it correctly, you should have one color, second color, 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 one color, second color. So they alternate all the way down on this warp string.